Hi everyone, I've been getting a few requests to show how to replace the drain pump in the GE Ultrafast 2-in-1 Combo unit, and I filmed this when I did the review of the washing machine, so here's how you would replace that drain pump if you have an issue. You're going to need the following because we're going to take the machine apart: a Phillips head screwdriver, a pair of pliers, a multimeter, a small flat-bladed screwdriver, and then either a door boot spring tool or a wrench and cable ties or some other way to get that nasty spring back on. Finally, make sure you have an organizer of some manner to sort screws based on where they came from in the machine, as there are quite a few. First, make sure that the washing machine is not on and unplug it from the wall. To begin, we need to remove the detergent and fabric softener dispensers from the machine. To remove the dispensers, pull them each individually all the way out as far as they're going to go until you can't anymore. Then press the tab down at the rear of each of these dispensers and pull them out. Next, once the dispensers are out, locate the following 5 screw holes. Each one is pretty deep inside, and you need to use a Phillips head screwdriver to remove each of these screws. On this particular unit that I'm dealing with today, removing the top 4 screws was pretty easy using a drill gun and a magnetic bit, which made it quite a bit easier due to the recessed nature of these holes. But on the last screw in the lower left corner, I had to use a screwdriver with a much thicker point, as it seems that it may require a thicker Phillips head drill bit, which kind of threw me off. Next, with all the screws out, go ahead and pull the filter out as far as it will go, then press the tab on the left side of the filter as shown, and then pull the entire filter housing assembly out. With that done, you can now take the console and pull forward on the front left side of the washer where the dispensers were, then pull up on it, and the assembly should fully detach from the front of the washing machine. Now, when you pull the console forward, note that there's going to be a huge cluster of wires hiding behind the interface panel. Make sure to have a glove or ESD bracelet on when you start to remove any of the wire harnesses. Now, from your point of view, these are the wires that you're going to see on the panel. Depending on what you want to do, the wires you need to remove may vary. To remove the interface from the rest of the machine, these are the 4 wires in black that are highlighted that you need to remove, and then depending on the situation, you may want to remove the one in red, but usually I suggest against it in most cases. Make sure to be very delicate with the wires as you remove them. Also note the push mount wire ties on the interface. Depending on your needs, you're probably going to have to use a wire cutter to remove some or most of these that are either inside the console itself or on the washing machine heat shield as well. Just be very careful not to damage these wires. When you use the wire cutters, remove only the plastic cable ties themselves. Here's another point of view on where most of the cable ties are that you may have to look at removing depending on what you're going to do. Next, separate the harness from the door light system here by pressing in the clip and then removing it. Then on the right side of the metal heat shield, you're going to find this hole with a wire that's going into it that should be blue and black. This is the blower thermistor. It's absolutely critical that you don't try to pull this out with your fingers by the wires or the harness itself, as you may break and destroy the harness in the attempt to do that. Instead, you want to take a pair of needle nose pliers, insert them into the thermistor housing, clamp down on the sides of the thermistor, and then remove it from the rubber housing that it's located in. When you have all the wires properly removed, you should be able to remove the entire console now fully from the machine. For the next part of this process, go ahead and start by opening the door of the unit. Then take a thin screwdriver and find the retainer wire on the washer gasket. It will be hiding behind the folds of the blue rubber here. Once you find it, press under the wire with the screwdriver and then pry it out of place. Once it's dislodged, carefully remove the wire from around the gasket. Then begin to carefully separate the gasket from around the front lip of the washing machine. The edges of the door could be a little bit sharp, so make sure to be careful and wear gloves. Now take a Phillips head screwdriver and remove the 2 screws from the plastic door lock cover. Once you have the 2 screws out, pull the cover off to reveal what's behind the covers: more screws. There are now 2 more screws holding the actual door lock in place. Go ahead and take the Phillips head screwdriver and remove these 2 screws. Once these 2 screws are out, you can go in where the washer gasket has been removed on this right side and then lift up on the door lock to remove it from the housing. Now let's finish to remove the front of the GE unit. There are 3 screws under the unit as you see here. Removing these screws could be quite difficult depending on your setup. In my case, I had to tilt the machine backward and wedge something under the legs to give a little bit of additional room. Once I have the bottom lifted up just a little bit, you can use a Phillips head screwdriver then to remove the 3 screws from the bottom of the washing machine. Next, use a pair of pliers to remove the dispenser hose clamp. Once it's pulled back, go ahead and remove the tube. Note that this hose could leak some water once you remove it. Now, there are 6 screws that need removed from the top of the washing machine front. The 6th screw on the far right side for reference is a bit different and wider, so please note that when you reinstall them. Go ahead and use your screwdriver or a drill gun with the Phillips bit to remove these 6 screws as needed. Now, with all the 13 different screws removed from the front of this unit, go ahead and remove the door by lifting up on the washer chassis, then away from the unit. Note that I did have to make sure that the items that I'd put underneath to wedge it to lift it up had to be moved further towards the rear of the machine so they would not catch on the front of the washer when I lifted up and out on the front. With the washer front now fully removed, you have access to all the additional systems inside the washing machine, such as the rest of the door gasket seal, the door lock, the drain pump, the front dampening system, and then finally the inverter motor control board, among other things. It's possible that you can get to the drain pump without this next step, but I would suggest using a 14mm socket wrench to remove the counterbalance from the unit. There are 4 bolts that need removed, and when you get to the last one, you want to brace a box or put your hand underneath the balancing weights just in case it wanted to fall off. But there are pegs that prevent this from easily falling off just by chance. Once you have the screws removed, pull the weights towards you to remove them from the pegs. Before we take the drain pump out, you want to unscrew this and drain any water left in the pump just in case. Make sure to have a towel or a small basin down to drain the water before you do any steps to remove the drain pump assembly. Go ahead and take a pair of slip-jawed pliers and remove the 2 large clamps that hold the blue and then black hoses on the rear of the unit. These can take a little while to remove, so be careful and steady. When you have the hose clamps removed, you can wiggle the 2 hoses off and away from the drain pump housing itself. Next, there are 2 screws on the drain pump facing upward. These are hard to see on the camera, but you will need to remove them with a Phillips head screwdriver, and you can kind of see where the location is here in the video. When you have both of these screws removed from the drain pump, you push the pump rearward, then up and out. In the case of this unit, the wire harness was somewhat hard to get off. It was a little bit harder than the other GE front-load washing machines, as I think there's 3 wires to this instead of 2. With the drain pump off, you can replace it as needed. If you wanted to test it with a multimeter to confirm anything, you'd set your multimeter to ohms resistance and test the 2 spade connectors. The drain pump should get about 20 ohms of resistance, plus or minus 10%. As a note, you can support the channel by buying the drain pump through our website. We stock and sell the choice parts style drain pump for this ultrafast combo washer dryer. There's going to be a link in the description to buy this if you'd like to help us out. Now, when you have your drain pump ready to install into the machine, you need to slowly work it back into the unit from the left side, at least in my case, which worked easiest for me. Once you have it in, attach the wire harness to the pump. Make sure that when you set the pump in place, the 2 small plastic tabs are inserted into the grommets in the front to secure it in place. The next thing that we're going to do is go ahead and insert and tighten the 2 screws onto the drain pump. The grommets will help line it up perfectly. Sometimes this is a little bit difficult to do, but once you have the screws properly inserted, go ahead and put the 2 hoses on and then tighten the clamps on to the hoses, and you should have your drain pump in. With the drain pump now installed, you'd want to reinstall the counterbalance weight to the machine. There are small pegs, like we just mentioned, that will hook onto the concrete to rest on, so it's not terribly hard to do, but I would put something underneath to help support it while you reinstall the 4 14mm screws to the unit. Now we want to go ahead and reinstall the door to the washing machine. And before you do this, note the plastic pegs on the chassis of the washer, 4 in all. When you install the washing machine door, it will need to lift up and then rest on these, and then will slot down into place. When putting the door back on, again, make sure that the door lock and gasket are placed properly so they don't get pinched anywhere when you seat the door onto the front of the washing machine. Also, make sure no wires from the interface get caught when the door is reinstalled either, because I may have goofed up on that in the process of this. Then bring the door to the washing machine chassis, lift up, and simply rest the door front onto the area where the pegs are. If done properly, the washing machine front will slide down into place on the pegs, locking themselves at the rear of those peg assemblies. Once done, roll the washing machine door gasket onto the door and continue to work around the door of the washing machine to the chassis, making sure that everything's situated on the pegs. I did have to lift the door into place a few times just to make sure it was fully seated, but this really wasn't too hard. When the washing machine's properly seated, there's not going to be any notable gap between the front of the washing machine door and the sides of the chassis as you see here in the video. There's almost no gap. On the bottom, you do have to ensure that the front of the washing machine was seated near or on these 3 metal fingers. I did not have any issues with lining these up because of those plastic pegs we keep talking about, but you just want to make sure that you pay attention to these during the installation if in case those got bent during disassembly. Now, let's go ahead and install the 6 screws at the top of the washing machine bulkhead to the chassis of the machine. Note that the last screw on the far right is a large wide-headed screw that goes into place. This is important because it helps lock the interface into place when we reinstall that in a little bit. You'll also then need to install the 3 screws at the bottom of the machine. Remember that you may need a gap underneath the washing machine, so make sure that you have it lifted up. Tilt the machine back if you need to install something underneath during this process. Once you have that done, go ahead and drop the machine on the floor, and you can now reach in to seat the door lock into the front of the door. Make sure that the small plastic catch on the door lock rests on the metal of the door like you see here in the video is circled. Then go ahead and seat the rubber hose onto the barb located here on the door. Use a pair of needle nose pliers to seat the hose clamp into place like you see. Now let's go back to the washing machine door gasket. You need to make sure that all the folds of the gasket are seated behind the metal lip of the door. This is kind of hard to show on camera, but it should be easy for you to see in person. Carefully work the gasket around the door. Typically, you want to use some dish soap behind the gasket to lube it up to make it easier for the gasket to seat into place. Once you have the full door gasket seated into place, reinstall the door retaining spring. This gasket's a little bit weird on the GEs because the typical hose spring tools won't work on this model, and I've had issues with some of the other GE Ultrafresh gaskets. The higher priced retaining tools will work, but the cheaper ones won't because of how small these springs are. I've done videos in the past showing you how to use a wrench and cable ties on how to install the spring clamp to the door, and I'll have a link to that video at the end of this. But I'll be honest, given how nice the washer is, I wasn't able to actually use this trick to get it to seat. Instead, what I did was I used some heavy-duty clamps to press down and hold the spring into place on one side, while I used a screwdriver to slowly bend the spring and wire retainer back into place. Essentially what I did to take it off in the first place in reverse. I did use 2 screwdrivers, which I am only showing the one on camera. Now, one thing to note about this fix is that I switched to a door boot spring tool that actually works on the GE washing machines. It works really, really well. If you are going to attempt this, I would suggest this tool to make it a little bit easier, although it's not absolutely needed. I'll have a link to it in the description of the video. With the spring back into place, go ahead and install the 2 screws to the door lock with a Phillips head screwdriver. Make sure that you use the right screws as the door lock screws are different than the plate screws. With the door lock in place, go ahead and reinstall the larger, thicker, finer thread screws into the door lock plate. Once you have those 4 screws into that whole assembly done, you now have the door essentially fully in place now. It's time to go ahead and reinsert all the wires into the interface to get the last pieces of the machine reinstalled. If you have gloves, make sure to use them. You should have approximately 4 wire harnesses to install here. The NTC wire, the dispenser wire, the door light wire, and then the main control power wire. And you do have to route a lot of these through the zip ties or push mount ties depending on what you've chosen when you installed the heat shield. Here's the pictures of the wires that I had to reinstall into the interface and how they go. I just wanted to take some pictures when I was reinstalling this to use them as a guiding principle when I put the interface back together. Finally, depending on what you did with the blower thermistor, you may have to reinsert the entire assembly or just the wire into place depending on if you took the whole unit out, and I did take the entire assembly out. This is how I have my system routed with the lack of the push mount cable ties, as again I had to buy a bunch after this video was done to try to find the right ones that would actually fit. Finally, roll the panel up into the heat shield and lock it into place. Mine's set and locked into place very easily, but the key here to get it installed is that the interface needs to thread onto the two large wide screws on the right side, and the interface should lock into place. You may have to push it in and then pull it to the left side to get it to snap into place, or even use an angle depending on the situation, but I was able to just press it in as you see. The last screws then to install on this machine before we have it back together are the 5 screws here in the interface. Note that the one screw on the machine was different in the lower left corner as it had a finer thread count. Also note that the dispenser likes to push rearward when you install these 5 screws. I had to make sure I kept pulling the dispenser forward into the interface to make sure that the screws reinstalled properly. Once you have all 5 screws into the dispenser and interface securely, you just have to insert the dispensers into place. Know that the bottom smaller dispenser has a groove at the bottom of the housing that needs matched up for it to insert properly into the housing. And that is everything. One final note that I want to make on this fix is that because we've seen this so often on the GE front-load washing machines, if the drain pump is still not working after you've replaced it, it's possible that a wire has been damaged going from the board to the drain pump, or the board itself has been damaged due to the pump dying and causing a voltage issue blowing something on the board. To confirm this, you'd want to take the unit apart until you get to the control board, and I have videos for this. Make sure that the interface is on, remove the cover to the control board, and test for 120 volts AC to see if it's outputting from the board to the drain pump using the drain pump test mode, and I have videos to show you how to do that. I don't have any footage of actually testing for VAC on this, but the wire collars from the board going to the pump should be the brown and black wires on CN5 according to the tech sheet. You would put your leads of the multimeter right here and test for 120 volts VAC while you're on option. According to the schematic, there's also a black wire on CN6 that goes down to the pump, so you could test the black wire on CN6 and then the brown wire on CN5 for 120 volts AC as well, I think. And here's where the location is of CN number 6. I don't have my Ultrafast Combo to show this on camera, but at least you get an idea here if that drain pump did not solve your problem. I hope this video helps you out, and I will again have a link to the pump, the boot spring tool, and then maybe even the board as well, if in case that was blown. But I hope this video again helps you out and solves a problem with your combo unit.